I'm Sarah Augustine, the Executive Director and co-founder of the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery. Our society now faces the stark consequences of ecological overshoot, including climate change. Many of us from Christian traditions wish to resist systems of power in a proactive way, but we most often participate in performative actions rather than engaging in systems change. Many of us do not know how to approach systems change. Indigenous peoples have successfully lived sustainably within their ecosystems because they've built systems designed to do this. Let us consider together how we might do so by consulting with Indigenous experts.
So I'm thrilled to welcome Jim Rock today as part of our lecture series. Jim comes to us from Minnesota, an academic who was the Planetarium Program Director and Director of Indigenous Programming at Marshall W. Alworth Planetarium at the University of Minnesota Duluth, an instructor at the Department of Physics and Astronomy, and the Native Skywatchers, also at University of Minnesota in Duluth, an instructor in the Department of American Indian Studies, Philosophy, and Education at Augsburg University, Minneapolis, also an instructor at the University of St. Thomas, Department of Education in Minneapolis, and at the Department of Physics and Astronomy at Fond du Lac Tribal and Community College in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We're so thrilled to have you with us, Jim, as an astronomer, an academic, a researcher, a cosmologist, a leader of your people, the Dakota people. So thankful to have you here. And with that, I would like to invite you to begin your presentation.
Apetuaste mitake api chanteoaste nahana pechius apido wamdi hayeto emaki apido Ocheti Shakowin Oyate hemataha. Good afternoon, my relatives. Good day. I greet you in a traditional Dakota protocol greeting, the way my Dakota father taught me. It means hello, my relatives. From a glad heart, I offer you my hand. And when we say relatives, we mean not just those of us with two legs, the two-legged ones, but all of those others that may have wings, as the star quilt design behind me, or the four-leggeds, the green, tall, standing ones, the swimming, the crawling, etc. So how to be a good relative is our Dakota challenge, to be a better relative each day than the day before. That's a huge challenge. And thank you, Michante Atan Wopida Tanka, Nina Wopida Tanka, Chichiapia. I give you great thanks for your wonderful words. I really don't feel worthy and able. My father, my Dakota father, should be the one here. He returned back to the stars about, it'll be 14 years ago, a little over 13 here. And so what I have been sharing comes from him and his parents, particularly his grandmother and his grandmother's grandmother. I'm also a governing council member, founding member of the Makoche Ikikchupi program, and I'll be sharing a bit about that. I have an outline of some items here, but I think one of the ways, we usually begin on Turtle Island as indigenous folks here in North America. We burn a little bit of sage. It's one of those prairie grasses, has a beautiful fragrance, and it's a way of recognizing that the breath we share comes from these green ones, these plants. And So I think I'll do share screen, and we tested my audio, and we'll see if there's a little video piece that comes up here. So, right? Hopefully you'll hear a flute shortly. Thumbs up, okay. That means I don't have to play the flute right now. I recorded this.
Wichoni, Oania, Onia, Nia, Nia Ken, Wichoni, Oania, Onia, Nia Ken, Wakan Tanka Tunka Shira, Wichowazi Vidamaya, Wakan Tanka Tunka Shira, Midakuye, Oasin Wichoni, Owania, Onia, Nia Ken. Wakan Tanka Tunka Shida, Wichowazi Vidamaya, Wakan Tanka Tunka Shida, Mitakuye, Oasin, we're alive, so alive, breathing out, breathing in, breath of life, we're alive, so alive. Thank you, grandparents. Thank you, great mystery. Thank you, relatives. Thank you, family. Wichoni, Oania, Onia, Nia Ken, Wichoni, Oania, Onia,
It just reminds me to breathe and not be nervous. And Napchiwanka means the number 9. And then Wancha is 1. So what's 9 plus 9 plus 1? You didn't know there'd be a math quiz, but that would be 18 plus 1, or 19. And that's how we say this in Dakota. So if you count the number of parts on this star quilt, the eagle, those little diamond shapes, you'll see 9 plus 9 plus 1, 18, 18 plus 1, 19. Now, if you count the beadwork that I'm also wearing today, I'll click a few here and you'll see from left to right anyhow. Not that that's how we have to count, but there we have 9. And another 9 on that side plus 1, which would be again 18 to 19. Interesting. So what does this image with that image? One is beadwork, one is quilt work. Quilt work. I'm doing quilt work with my wife right now. So here we are. I said I was of the Ocheti Shakowin Oyate. You recognize in the Western way, the 4 stars of the bowl of the Big Dipper and the 3 of the handle. But those are the 4 Dakota, the 2 Nakota, and the 1 Lakota. Together, we are the 7, and that's what Shakowin. Shakowin means 7. And Ocheti is like fire, but they're also stars. So they're the 7 starfire nations. And so if I put a little teepee at each of these locations, when we come into a prairie area and we're going to have a gathering of all of our different Oyates, we put our different groups of teepees in these positions, so we know which ones of us are where. And for those of you who've been to a powwow, you know, we call that the wachipi. It means they dance. So, or perhaps you're more familiar with the metaphor of a canoe. And as I said, all my relatives, some that fly and swim, and so there's kind of human forms in that canoe. We're all in one canoe as relatives. So it's a good idea not to drill holes in the canoe or light fires or upset the balance, to learn how to be in balance together as we journey. That canoe is Earth Mother, Maka'ina. So she requires us to be in balance, to have respect, to learn how to be good relatives. And they were here long before us. We humans came along after them in many different cosmologies. So that's why we begin by saying, hello, my relatives. And that song about breath, the flute is like the wind. And obviously I wouldn't be here without my parents and grandparents and all the ancestors. Again, those are the words of that song. So that's a way to say thanks to my dad. The heartbeat is the drum, and the flute is like the wind, the rattle is like the rain. And this is my Dakota dad with our granddaughter when he gave her her name. She was just a few months old, and now she just had her 17th birthday. So if I subtract their ages here, they were about 932 moons difference. And Chante, washte, that chante is heart, washte is good or happy, joyful, joyful heart. And so these 2 little drum beats, lub dub, heartbeats, breathing and drumming together, dancing together. 2 hearts, 2 happy, joyful hearts. So I have worked with NASA and NOAA, and I brought my heartbeat and my turtle shell out to Goddard Space Flight Center, and we could project images onto a large sphere like this. So I showed how this heartbeat is like sunrise, sunset, moonrise, moonset. And so you know this phrase, love you to the moon and back, right? Well, at the speed of light, that's only about 1 1/3 seconds. But you think about how far that light travels, about 500,000 miles round trip. So, you know, love you to the moon and back. Well, hopefully that's for longer time than just 1 1/3 second at the speed of light. So it's this idea that when my dad went off to Korea, he was a paratrooper in that war, kind of starting when he was already about 18. But his mother told him, you're going to be far away, and there'll be challenging times as you go off to this conflict. And but know that my face is always there looking for you from the same mirror. So that lunar face is very feminine for us, very much like a mom or a grandma. And so that's kind of why I started with that. And this is our grandson at one of those powwows. I have a granddaughter and a grandson. That's my wife on the other side of grandson. And this is my dad and I, and 102 of us stayed in that teepee that night. It was the 2 humans and about 100 grasshoppers. And so anyway, here we are on Turtle Island. We are Turtle Islanders. It's our name for North America. Home is where our story begins. Home is where the heart is. Kind of using home plate because my dad did like baseball as well. But home is where our story begins. His story, her story. So here's another little video, and I hope this plays. It'll begin in Dakota language with translation. Tells you a little bit about the place where our Dakota people consider our center of the universe.
Hamitakapi, Chandewashte na Pechiusa Pido, Ocheti Shakowin Oyate Himataha, Wamdi Hayetu Imakiapido, Damakota, Sisseton Dakota Himata. All my relatives, I speak to you today with a glad heart. Offer you my hand. My dad was Sisseton Dakota of the 7 Starfire Nations, Ocheti Shakowin Oyate. My name is Jim Rock in English, Wamdi Hayetu and Dakota Ya. I was born at Iminija Ska Ed Himachare. I was born at St. Paul, at near a place called Wakantipi, the cave in which we have the drawings that tell something of our cosmic origins. So what I do is in a planetarium. I was, trained in Western science, but always kept our own ways of thinking here. And the two legs have really come together well in that the word nucleosynthesis, it just means that atoms are made in stars. And we've always said we come from the stars, to the stars we return. We come from the earth, to the earth we return. The iron in our blood, the carbon in our body had to come from a sun before this sun. So we're recycled stardust. Star stuff are us, I like to say. The Milky Way is like a river, not just any river, but Hahawakpa or Wakpatanka, Wakpahaska, the big long river, the river of the waterfalls. We find burial mounds near rivers. It's very intentional. It's not random. Our elders, those that have passed on, deserve the highest place near water to go back up to the stars, place of honor, by the water that flows. Chang, Changwakang, Wakachang, the sacred tree, Sundance tree, the cottonwood tree, it's filled with stars. That tree full of stars connects between sky and earth. Along rivers, it likes its feet wet, its roots. It's a bridge between the river down here with sparkling lights on it and the sparkling stars above, the Wanagi Tachanku, the spirit road, the road of spirits that we come from and go back to. And we need to be living in a good way so that we go back to that place we come from with integrity, with generosity.
So many of us now live in places with light bulbs. Since 1879, the year the light bulb was born, the year Einstein was born, the year my great-grandfather was born. And unfortunately, it was the year that almost the lowest point in the numbers of our buffalo people. As you saw, those were buffalo stars, and my father's name was Tabadoka Sapa Itokab Najin Shni. Do not stand in front of the black buffalo. And that's a name that explains a sign of respect we have for that large bison or buffalo in the sky. So as we look at this Milky Way, without light bulbs, you can see why, like the buffalo, numberless numbers. The idea that it's uncountable. And now, sadly, with light bulbs, we may only see 10, 15, 20 stars or planets. They should be uncountable numbers, like 60 million bison, which once ran here on North America, on Turtle Island. And they were only down to maybe 300 to 600 by the year my great-grandfather was born. So as Sarah challenged us to consider a time before everything changed with railroads and light bulbs. So as we learn to read nature, we didn't have an alphabet here in the sense of alpha, beta, or Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, but we certainly knew how to read the book of nature, if you want to call her a book. And so even the placenta, the umbilical cord that connects us, is much like a tree, and we refer to the family tree. And in that video, we just talked about the cottonwood tree, which is a bridge for us between the Milky Way above and the Mississippi River below. Anyway, I helped to make this star map with two of our Ocheti Shakowin relatives. And there's a little booklet that goes with this, which tells some of our symbolism, our cosmology. But where I'm from is a place where the water reflects the sky. Mini is water. Makoche is land. So Minnesota Makoche, we say. Notice it's not Minnesota or mini, it's Mini. Mini is water. And so this entire state, for many thousands of years, probably since the glaciers melted 12,000, 13,000 years ago, was our area. And that included places west, east, south, and north from here. It was larger than just Minnesota Makoche. Unfortunately, as of 1862, 1863, there was a law that said we could no longer be here. And so 90% of us no longer live in Minnesota Makoche. We have been exiled for 162 years. However, those four little red dots you see in the southern third of the state, they're drawn too large, I might point out. But that is 0.01% of where we used to live, right? 99.99% of our Makoche, our land, is no longer where we are. And this is the places of our ancestors. So we have some of these dates based on a calendar that came here. These written numbers and letters and these dates represent times and people where it all seemed to change after many, many, many thousands of years. This is really just 350 years or so. And the name changed to Minnesota from Minnesota. And that song I sang earlier was Wichoni. Wichoni means life, and Mini is water. Mini Wichoni. Now, my wife is Odawa and Ojibwe. In her language, water is Nibe, and life is Bimadisuin. So our kids and grandchildren, they speak at least two of our Turtle Island languages here. Nibe Bimadisuin, Mini Wichoni. There is the canoe, our Earth Mother, the one ball that holds us all, and the 5 large lakes. And again, it looks like turtle. One leg is Florida, one turtle leg. The other rear turtle leg is Baja California. And the tail goes down, Mexico to the Yucatan Peninsula. So it's a good place to live up here on the turtle's back where the 5 lakes flow. In fact, we know that a drop of water will stay in Lake Superior for about 200 years before that drop of water moves on to the next lake and the next lake and those waterfalls. So just a quick graphic here of how long this story that we're sharing, her story, his story, our story. Home is where the story begins, right? Home plate. So these glacial fish and many other fish that should be doing well, unfortunately, the largest of these Great Lakes is also the fastest warming. They're not icing over as they used to. That's important. These fish came from a glacial time where they need these icy water. Cold water holds oxygen better. And as the lakes warm, we're getting algae blooms. And, there's a lot of hard news to share here. But the cool thing about Minnesota Makoche is water will flow 3 different ways from this land, this Makoche. It'll flow east to the Atlantic, south through to the Gulf of Mexico, and then north up to Canada and Hudson Bay. So we have a responsibility to protect that water while we're here. This is what we call an initipi, or a sweat lodge. It's just init, or it's neat, is short for wichoni, which you know is life, and nia is breath and breathing. So that's the first song that I was singing. So we go in here, we cover that frame structure with buffalo hides. We have a fire. The rocks are in there. They get hot. We bring the rocks into that lodge and pour water on those, and the steam in the dark. We breathe and we feel our heart. And we go back to that time of darkness as the universe was being formed, the sun and the moon and the earth, and we breathe, and we basically detoxify. We empty our minds of negative thoughts, and we're grateful to have this breath and this life that we share. So that's one of our 7 ceremonies. On the right, that's not a sweat lodge. That is a planetarium that I could take around. And so I just wanted you to see that a turtle shell has the shape of our planetarium dome, but also the sweat lodge dome. And so it's very similar. I bring a projection system into that planetarium, and people come in. Instead of hot rocks, it's a hot light bulb, and it projects the stars onto the ceiling of that dome. Well, I mentioned in that video, we have a cave. Well, we had a cave here in St. Paul, downtown St. Paul, by the Hahawakpa, the Mississippi River. And on the ceiling of that cave were these drawings, the star animal drawings. So now that I can have this portable planetarium or a fixed planetarium at various universities, we can show people which stars are ours. And you know, we didn't see a giraffe or elephants, or, you know, some of those Greco-Roman, Egyptian, Babylonian stars, but we had our own stars. And so those first 7 rocks that get hot are for the 7 stars that we say we come from. So now you see how this lodge is prepared, again, covered with bison robe, because there's bison stars up there as well. And we are the buffalo people. When we eat the buffalo, we are the buffalo. We believe we are birthed from a buffalo in the sky. And so this is about a 20-acre piece of land we've been able to buy back from the colonizers, the settlers. This is not reservation land. It's within 2 miles of a city, small city, and on the river, but it's where the ancestors we know were, because of the stones and the view that we see of that river valley. We know they would have seen the bison. And so we're not just trying to survive, but thrive, to live the way the ancestors did. And we didn't just live in teepees. We also had a bark lodge, like you see on the right, more around planting time, you know, spring. And then we also had an earth lodge. And so we are reconstructing these earth lodges when we are able to buy back a piece of land. So the project where we do this is called Makoche Ikikchupi. Makoche, as you know, is land, and Ikikchupi means to return. So it's land return, but it's also land repair, land getting healthier, land that our ancestors lived on, that we also want to join them on, our sacred sites, you know, ancient places of birth and death. And so Makoche Ikikchupi began when it was a vision of our Dr. Wazia Towin. She wrote a book called What Would Justice Look Like? What Does Justice Look Like? In Minnesota, Makoche, around the year 2008. And many wonderful allies and a lot of folks from various faith communities, particularly, again, Mennonite community. So thank you for sharing, being with us. Read her book, and many folks living in urban areas, and even churches that have campgrounds on lakes and such. realized that if they were willing to donate some money, when we got enough, we could buy it back. Of course, in 1851, they said our land was worth 6 cents an acre. I don't know where they got a price like that, but we were never paid for the 6 cents an acre for something like 24 million to 60 million acres. And now we have to buy it back at 10,000 and more an acre, dollars, that is. And so we're slowly trying to come back to these places. So here's some of the blueprint, the view of what we're doing here. We're building these earth lodges at a place we call, our first site is called Zani Otunwe. Zani is short for Wichozani, means health. So it's healthy village, village of healthy living. And a turtle shell has 13 parts. And so you'll see these kind of dome-shaped earth lodges and a turtle-shaped garden. And then some of these geodesic dome shapes, which could be greenhouses to extend our planting season. So again, why 7? Well, because we're the 7 Starfire peoples, the 4 Dakotas, the 2 Nakota, and the Lakota. So before we were Dakotas, Nakotas, and Lakota, we were one people, and we started here where the Mississippi River and the Minnesota River join. We call that Bedote. Bedote is where the rivers join. And over, hundreds of years, thousands of years, and certainly the last 162 years, we had to leave. My father's people walked 1,000 miles northwest up to Saskatchewan because there was a $200 bounty on our heads. So coming back means getting these tamarack trees and debarking them and setting them up. And it builds community as we work together, as we're relatives, and as we see this vision of coming home taking place. So here's under construction, you'll see there's 4 of those trees in the center, and then they're squared off like that. And then around that 4 in the middle, there are 13, and they're not straight up, they're leaning outward, 13 outward. So 4 in the middle, 13 outward. If you multiply 4 by 13, you get 52. And we'll come back to these numbers, but then you put tops on those 13, make kind of a circle of 13, a 13-sided polygon here. And then those represent the 4 solstices and equinoxes, 2 equinox, 2 solstice. For us Dakotas, the new year begins on March 20th. So I know it's 2024, you've already had January 1st New Year, but for us it's coming quickly, where the day is 12 hours of night and 12 hours of day, where the day and night are balanced, where the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, but more exactly east and west, rather than say northeast or southeast. So the 13 outwards are like the 13 moons on a turtle shell, or the 13 parts on a turtle shell. And we say there are 13 moons, not 12 moons. So you see why I call this idea starchitecture, starchitecture. It's also lunarchitecture, lunarchitecture, lunar, lunarchitecture, or starchitecture. And then you put in the 52 trees around the top circle that lean from the lower circle to the upper square. And then that will be covered with earth. And that earth will then grow the prairie grasses. And so it's essentially half below the earth and half above. We know from a couple of winters back, the first one was built around 2018, I believe. It got to be 40 to 50 below zero, but it was 50 above zero in here. Now that's Fahrenheit. We have wood stove, and we don't want electricity in here or internet. We don't use sheetrock and plumbing and copper, and we build the way the ancestors did, and it was good enough for them. And so when you look at this number, there are 52 weeks in a year. But you also know that some of our relatives down in Central America also have 52 years in a cycle. So this 52 may come from a time, how about this idea, when we couldn't live here, even in these, when the glaciers were here 13,000 years ago. They were a mile or 2 miles thick of ice. We didn't stay here and freeze. We had canoes made of these trees. We went down the big rivers, so we hung around down south and with our relatives in the south part of Turtle Island. So they could be 52 weeks or 52 years, but did you also know we have 52 teeth? You have, when you're a baby, 10 baby teeth on top and 10 on the bottom. 10 and 10, that's 20 teeth, like your 20 fingers and toes. But then you lose those 10 and you get 14 above and 14 below. Well, that's 28, except don't forget the 4 wisdom teeth. So 28 plus 4 is 32 adult teeth, secondary teeth, and then the 20 primary teeth. 20 and 32, 52 teeth. 52 years in a cycle or 52 weeks in a year. That's 52 times 7, which is 364, like days in a year. Say, well, shouldn't it be 365 and a little more? Right, that's what I thought too. That's where my Western training taught me that it's 365.24219 days. And then I realized if you want to predict eclipses, you should use the 13 moons of a turtle shell. So we'll go just a little into this and we'll take a pause and see what you're thinking. But when you fill that in, you can see that it's not dark in there. The light comes in, and but it keeps the cold out, and yet it's cool in the hot summer times as well. So understanding the pattern of how the sun and the moon move from east to west, but they're also moving north and south in the east and north and south in the west. They make an X. The sun and the moon move in an X shape. And so if you see how these roof trees are lined up, and then here's the entrance or exit, it's very much like, how should I say this? Your birth. The way we come in and go out of this world, from birth, life, death. And as plants, those plants recycle, they're reborn again. So you see how it used to look up here, not this year. We've not had enough snow this year. And but we finally did just get something like 4 to 5, 6, 7 inches. We've only had maybe 14 inches this year. We had 90 inches last year. So climate change is showing us, but here's the inside of that when it's all fixed up. And we can have ceremony, and multiple families can live in here. And we have our food preserved, and we can again cook over wood stove. Our elders can show us how we made, arrows and weapons and drums, musical instruments. They tell stories. So this is one of our elders and his children and grandchildren. There's the panorama vista of the river valley. And so, yeah, if you're interested, you can take a screenshot of that web address, makocheikikchupi.com. And there's more to read about, but I just wanted to start a little bit there with, what would it look like, as Sarah posed that question, what would it look like before colonial contact, before a system of individuality that said you must earn enough money to make it on your own, and you must have your own piece of land. Don't share that piece of land in common. No commonly owned land or washing machine or, I mean, everything shifted with this commoditized capitalist, I have mine, too bad for you if you don't have yours. That kind of thinking is not the way we are. We are leaning together like the poles in a teepee or the trees in an earth lodge. We work together, and we either share what we have and we are richly blessed, or we're hurting. And so that's who we are and why this matters. And you can go on the website and learn more about this project of reparative justice. Thank you for your interest. Actually, that should be about 5 years ago anyway. And oh, okay. So this is the guy that said we couldn't be here anymore. And I won't have time today to go into why that is, but these are his exact words, that we must be exterminated. That's genocide, or driven forever beyond the borders of what they called the new state of Minnesota, state number 32, on their way to 50. Here are some of those dates where everything's changed in the last 350 years. So we were promised money for those lands. It wasn't a lot of money when you consider we needed water. How do you live without the wild rice and the buffalo and the deer and your hunting lands and the places where you were birthed and buried? But after 11 years, that money never came, and it was a drought. They were starving. The children and the grandmas and the young men said, we can't watch this anymore. What's the matter with you leaders? You're just going to watch all the grandmas. And they said, no. Well, are you a coward? No, I'm not a coward. But Little Crow said, you don't know how many there are. We've been out to Washington on the east side of Turtle Island. They will just keep coming. You can't, violence won't work. And unfortunately, August 16, 17 of 1862, there was a skirmish over, some say it was a cow or some eggs. There were injuries, and it only lasted about 6 weeks, but we're not sure how many, maybe 300 to 500 were killed or wounded on both sides, settlers and indigenous Dakota people. And so this was during the breakout of the Civil War of the United States. You could learn more about this, but we won't have time to go into it today. But during the Lincoln administration, and North and South, and a lot of people didn't want to admit it was really about slavery either. They just kind of thought it was about, some of the states wanting to do their own thing. Well, yeah, because of thinking they could own humans. And anyway, 38, what should have been 303, they said 303 people should be hung for this. And in 5-minute to 10-minute trials, it was sort of shortened to 38. And then 2 years later, 2 more, 38 plus 2. This is the largest mass hanging in US history. And it was the day after Christmas. So these people in the town of Mankato, that's a misspelling of Makato, means blue-green earth. They had opened their Christmas presents and sang their hymns to Jesus the day before, and they lined up to watch this. So anyway, this is our first Earth Lodge, and it's not in Minnesota, it's over in South Dakota. When we tried to build our first Earth Lodge in Minnesota, they said we'd be arrested. 2 weeks after we had begun, we got the land, and we started getting the trees and preparing them, and they said it'd be $10,000 a day. You'll be arrested. You're in violation of Minnesota building code, where you have to have sheetrock and plumbing and copper, electricity, and so forth. Hard hats. Well, the city of Granite Falls said, we have 2 lawyers. We have the city council, the mayor. We're going to call you to a meeting. Bring your lawyers. Well, we don't have lawyers, but we do know what our highest law is. As the creator, the one who made us, sustains us, gives us life, our life giver, our breath maker. We have what you might call the peace pipe. It's a prayer pipe. It's the way we communicate. We send our voices together in prayer. The bowl is made of a special stone, pipe stone, where red plus yellow plus white plus black mixed to make that beautiful maroon pipestone color. And then the stem, that stem represents the sky. And then the bowl, the stone bowl, is the earth. And so every grain of tobacco that's placed in there represents one of the many, many, many kinds of relatives. You might say the DNA today. But tobacco is that very old symbol of the plant that, like all plants, comes first. The plants made the air we breathe. So when we share that breath together. Anyway, within 5 hours of the first meeting, we know our prayers were answered because the city changed its mind. And they even volunteered to let us have their 2 lawyers, their 2 attorneys. I mean, did you hear what I said? That's pretty shocking. So then we had to change Minnesota state law. So this was just as COVID was cranking up. House floor and Senate floor bills 1042, 1087. It never made it through because COVID canceled everything by the spring of that 2020. And then we had to start all over again the next fall. And we had both Republican and Democratic, senators and representatives. Minnesota, like the nation, was very divided that year, 50-50 in the legislature. So, I mean, you think about prayer and faith and what it would take to get 2 sides to work together. And it's pretty miraculous. So we were able to get our first piece of land. And unfortunately, there were people who were stealing, were violating. We didn't want to put up big fences, but our tools and, we put up some cameras and they were taking, people ride through on snowmobiles and ATVs. And so anyway, now we have to, like everybody else, live behind fences and say, call here. We need to know who you are. We want to welcome you as relatives, but some people don't work that way. They don't live that way. Their values aren't the same as ours. So we got a waiver. You need to know we didn't really change the law. It just says we can now ask daddy's permission. So we bought a second piece of land and we have 2 properties and we're still hoping now to maybe buy a third piece of land. We have 3 earth lodges built on the first one and another lodge on the second land. So we have 4 of our lodges built. And there's some timelines, and yeah, we have the greenhouse, and here's where we had a Thanksgiving, and some of the legislators who voted for us. And I'm wearing one of those shirts today. That's our governing council shirt. We have ethnobotanists and yeah, many people with lots of background, but we hope it's something that can help our children and our grandchildren to live in a different way. And so just like the sun and the moon and planets like Jupiter and Saturn, every 20 years, a little less than 20 years, Jupiter and Saturn get together. And so on October 25th of 1861, Little Crow and his son probably saw those 2 planets get close together. And that happened again on the December solstice of 2020. So maybe we can, from our original places, look up and see the sky the way our ancestors did. Unfortunately, Little Crow was captured 2 years later, just before 4th of July, and he was decapitated, and his bones were kept in the Minnesota Historical Society. And there's lots of those details. I'll spare you some of that. But so this is from my own backyard where I have the sweat lodge. We can see where the sun is. And it was in this backyard where my dad gave our granddaughter her name. And so I think I've kind of circled back to the point that says for over 10,000 years, we've been here where the water falls, where it flows, where the ice comes and goes, where we try to be good relatives. And this is a map of our own names. Every place had a name, but now many of these, maybe all of these names have changed, or they've been misspelled if there are a few Dakota names left. So my dad helped this map maker to make this place. And so we're returning the names of these places, the names of the creeks and rivers and lakes and the hilltops. And sometimes our wonderful allies, again, those in faith communities, churches and so forth, those who are willing to see it as perhaps paying back rent, they're helping us. And because many of these lakes were named after, there was a Lake Calhoun. He was the Secretary of Defense who was in favor of slavery. And that lake, we know, had the Dakota name of Bede Makaska, White Earth Lake in Minneapolis. So There's another river over here. That's about 14 miles away. There's some burial mounds on the left side of that red line, and there's another mound over there on the right side of that line, 14 miles away. So some of my research is looking at these angles and the number and shape of the mounds. And I believe they have a lot to do with counting the sun and the moon, and we could predict eclipses. So that's where the astronomy and the connection between sky and earth. But this is information that, sadly, it's been lost because the mounds were bulldozed. The cave was dynamited. The land was taken. And so those of us who grew up in the cities, some of us didn't even grow up with our language because my dad went to boarding school. And I guess what I'm saying is there's a long mound about 2 football fields long, and it's shaped like a snake. And I know that the snake symbol is not one that, biblically anyway, the first time the snake is talked about, it's not in a very good way. But don't forget that Moses also led the people with a very important pole. And on that pole, he had a serpent. And that was a bit confusing, or, he grew up in an Egyptian system, not knowing who he was. And the Egyptians certainly knew about snakes and the Nile and cobras and so forth. Well, for us, it turns out that snake symbol has to do with women, but not in the way that the tree and the snake had to do with Eve. For us, it has to do with birth. And I'll just cut to the quick here and say that the snake symbol has to do with the umbilical cord. And so that's birth. That's the mother connection. And all the way back, all the mothers. And so if we're understanding this properly, and they left us their numbers, 1 basket of earth at a time. To build mounds required 1 basket full of earth, carefully brought up from the river bottoms and walked up hilltops and emptied lovingly and prayerfully, 1 basket at a time. And you can imagine, I'll tell you that it was up until 1971, so my young eyes were able to see this as my grandfather took me here. But after 1971, you'll never be able to see it again. And it was already damaged with sewage pipes and so forth. But it was 10 truckloads. And by truckloads, I mean like those 53-foot long 18-wheeler trucks. They're 53 feet long, standard size. 10 of those, 530 feet. So 10 of those semi-trucks of earth covered it up. So it made a dam or a dike. So in the springtime, when the river floods, it wouldn't cover the streets of this little town called Afton. And, but actually, that's a symbol of the water protector. Our serpent has horns, a horned water protector. It's very feminine in the sense that that water is her blood, Earth Mother's blood. We need that springtime water. It makes the soil healthy, the black soil to plant the seeds in. And there's lots to understand, but I call that mound Rima, Rattlesnake Effigy Mound at Afton. Afton is the name of the town here, Rima. And so as we studied this map and looked at these alignments, the railroad came in, dynamited a lot of these places, bulldozed and flattened the Indian mounds. We've had to reconstruct. So now you'll understand where the very first pictures of this talk today came from. You'll see there were 19 mounds above a cave. The cave was Wakantipi. Up the road about 7/10 of a mile, 18 more mounds. Why 19 mounds and 18 mounds? I asked myself for about 50 years. And then I realized the answer was in me all the time when I studied chemistry and physics and astronomy. 19 mounds represents 19 years, if I'm right about that, and 18 years. Why 18 years and 19 years? Because those are patterns of possible eclipses where the moon gets in front of the sun. And that area down there, that little triangle, it's a parking lot for trains now, but that used to be where Little Crow's village started. And so for many years, we lived there. I mean, hundreds of years, if not thousands. And so we watched these patterns of the sun and the moon lining up and perhaps making shadows. And then the railroad came through and they drained the swamps. Those swamps are life. That's, we need wetlands. Now they're worried about these floods because the water has no place to go. So there's the 14-mile distance at the right angle. I measured the angles and the pattern, and sure enough, if you stand up in those mound places at just the right place, you'll see where the moon rises every 18.6 years. So not just 18 years or 19 years, but a number in between those two mounds, 18.61 years. And there's Little Crow. This is where his village was, Kapoja. And I told you what happened to him, unfortunately, after he and his son witnessed those two planets in October of 1861. So here's a painting of, what it looked like 1888. That was 20 years after we were no longer here. So now there's freeways and railroads, but we can still hopefully reconstruct what our ancestors wanted us to learn. And we're trying to change the signs, and some of the city parks and state parks are now coming back to us. And I'm going to stop here on this part and stop share. There's another part I'd like to pull up, but I'll just stop there for a minute and see what your reaction and comments are and do a time check here. By my clock, it's 3:03, so you're at 1:03, I believe, eh?
Yeah. Thank you, Jim. I have a variety of comments to make, and it sounds like you have another bit of presentation you'd like to make. So I wonder if you can just bear with me for a minute. I'm going to share some of what I heard from you as we're holding this question together. What would a society be based upon if it isn't self-interest? So all of us are growing up in this paradigm, understanding that the main principle society is based upon is self-interest. So this being our economic system, capitalism, where the unit is the individual, and the process is all barriers removed for the individual to pursue profit. So the output is profit, and the unit is the individual. But we know for most of human history that was not the basis of how we are together, not only as people, but among all living things. And so the question that we're holding together is, what else? What else could we base our society together upon? And so I'm just going to reflect back to you, Jim, some of the things that I heard. And the first one was really exciting to me as you were talking about, I think you called it the spirit road between the earth and sky. You had a pyramid, not a pyramid, an hourglass shape there. And what I've been taught by my elders is learning about the Mobius strip, or this understanding of infinity, and the way that we walk and our impact is along that pattern of the Mobius strip. And when you were talking about that, it was just very familiar to me. And then again, when you were talking about the sun and moon cycle, that X shape is that same pattern of that Mobius strip. And I'm not going to go into, the teachings that I've learned about that, but just that was really so amazing to me to hear you talking about that. And I thought, oh yeah, those are the same teachings that I have learned. And so I want to give you a chance to comment. And then I want to just tell you what I heard, some of the assumptions that you've made based on your sharing.
Oh, wonderful. Sure. And I don't know if people have a way to send you some comments or questions in the chat, and maybe
we'll do that.
Yeah, you check your chat and I'll make a couple comments. That hourglass shape, the two triangles, that's almost where I left off in the PowerPoint. So I'll come back there. We call that Kapemini, K-A-P-E, Kape, and then M-N-I, Mani. Mani means water. So again, water's like a mirror. So what's below is above. And so that's why it looks like two triangles coming to a point, or like an hourglass. And it's also the teepee poles. And so, yeah, it's a model for how we live. We're leaning together like teepee poles. Maybe I'll use my fingers here. You see first teepee poles, the first three poles, and then they form two triangles if you were to slice the teepee from top to bottom. And so it's not just a triangle on the earth and a triangle up in the sky, but a whole circle once you lean more pole into that.
And so, I appreciate that.
it's very much a community, social connectedness, spiritual. You know, we're just living in these physical bodies for a while. We recognize that we're spiritual creatures, spiritual relatives having a physical experience.
Thank you, Jim. And so I'm going to list some of the assumptions I heard, and then I'm going to open it up to our group for questions.
Sure.
So I'm going to ask you to turn your cameras on in just a minute, and we can pose questions to Jim. But first, I wanted to state some of the assumptions that I heard and check those with you, Jim. I heard a strong connection between the earth and the sky, and an implication of interconnection. You were really talking about not only as people, but with all of the relatives, including what I've been trained to call the standing green nation, those plants that we depend on for life. And so interconnection is one of the core learnings that I'm taking away. Also, balance in the systems of life. So you were talking about that, reflected in the star architecture. That star architecture reflects equinoxes and the moon cycle. So this interconnection between the actual structure itself as a reflection of reality that we see in creation. And so I also heard, that we are part of the earth canoe. And so we're all in it together. This is back to that theme of interdependence. And when you're in a canoe all together, you don't drill holes in it to let the water up and sink it all. So this understanding of a reality of interconnection. And then the last thing that I want to point out, there was so much learning, but this one really stood out to me, was that the materials of the dwellings are made by the resources available. So using those resources and not sort of thinking about how can we maximize, our pleasure or our comfort by trucking things in from elsewhere, but thinking really clearly about what does it mean to be in harmony with this landscape, and how can we be in balance with that landscape. And then another thing that I heard in terms of leaning together, so the poles of the teepee leaning together, it's this interdependence again. But I was also thinking about learning together, that we're actually in a process. We're in a process of life. What I think I heard you call it, you were talking about the connection between the river, the Mississippi, and the river in the sky, which is the Milky Way. Like, we're part of this process of life. And how do we navigate that together in a good way in this sort of ongoing mutual dependence?
Wow. I wish all my students were, wow, that's great. Did I really cover all that? Wow.
That's what I heard. But, I would be honored to be called a student of yours, Jim. And I am so thankful that you're willing to spend this time. And I want to just state that here too, for our learners and listeners, that, among my people, it's really considered an arrogant thing to ask for cosmology, because so much of it has been taken away and misused. And so it is really an act of deep generosity to be willing to share with us. So I thank you for that, Jim. And I want to invite our listeners here to turn on your cameras. And I noticed there's at least one comment in the chat, but you're certainly welcome to ask Jim directly.
Thank you so much for sharing so much of your family, from where you are, of your place, which I'm not familiar with. I appreciate that so much. I'm just thinking, I'm really so interested in how you're reconstructing your buried ancestors' lessons. And I think that for most of us here who have colonialist ancestors, their good teachings have been buried a different way. And I'm just thinking about, how do we discern what teachings do we keep, treasure, and which ones do we let go of? And any wisdom on that, much appreciated.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for your wonderful comments, all of you, and your time today, really. You know, both my wife and myself, our mothers were willing to marry Indigenous guys in the 1950s. And when you think about it, that was against the law. And it is still against the law for my people to be in our home state on this part of Turtle Island. I mean, you know, nobody's tried to cash in the bounty, but don't tell anyone we're still here. I know we kind of have some dark humor, but it does help us. So those values, right? What are the values that help us not just survive, but thrive? I know this is, I do have a comment, but I know I can't speak for all my people, no way. I can just tell you what my father, mother, because my mother was European as well as my wife's mom, my mother-in-law, and she's still with us. I get to take her to the church that she likes to go to. And that church has now donated money so we could buy land at what is the pastor's hometown, where he grew up down in south central Minnesota. I mean, see, none of us knew those connections, but it's like coincidence? No, we don't buy coincidence indigenously. Everything has its place in your path, you know? And whether that path is down here by the river or up there in the stars, it's all connected, like you saw in that Kapemini. And so if we're living in a good way, those things will happen. And so that community feels better about knowing where they are, and they're helping us change the name of the creek from one of the original farmstead names, that person's last name, to what we called it, Hahawakpadang. Hahawakpa means the river, Wakpa, haha, of the waterfalls. Those were a very large waterfalls when the ice was melting, 8 to 10,000 years ago. They were a mile across. They said they could be heard like 15, 20 miles away. And over 10,000 years, that waterfall slowly moved. Get this, right? Over 10,000 years, it moved about 10 miles in a letter S, a letter S shape from St. Paul up to now Minneapolis. So as you know, Minneapolis was known as Mill City because they built all these flour mills. And they took out the prairie grasses, which had like 9 to 12 feet of topsoil. The buffalo, gave us everything we needed. We had a very balanced diet. We had fish and again, the wild rice and the prairie plants and so forth. But then they planted wheat, and they to make gravity, water flowing, you could spin the wheels, the water wheels, which would then grind the stone mills. So it became Mill City. And now we still have General Mills, the corporate, breakfast cereals, or Washburn Mills, and we have Cargill and 3M and many others. I'm not trying to give commercials. I'm just saying that the large corporates that own the world and patent everything, in fact, then modify the DNA, which our creator spirit put into these plant relatives and animal relatives. We're battling that level of, academic and corporate research that wants to patent our wild rice or our corn, so that, the corn situation, right? You apply toxic chemicals and nothing grows. And then not even your corn sprouts out unless you buy it every year. It's like addiction. It's like a drug dealer thing. It's like big pharma. And so I was trained in chemistry, chemical engineering, and physics, astronomy. I decided not to work for those systems because I was able to live in the Amazon, and not just there, but the Andes, in Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador. And I realized that my indigenous relatives who were trying to hang on and trying to stop the pipelines from going in down there. But, you know, sadly, very similarly, just like here at Standing Rock, it happened anyway. So I guess, you know, just thinking big picture, because short-term profits for a few, that's that kind of top-down thinking. Some of our people in Central and South America did build pyramids. We did try that kind of top-down royal family stuff. And a lot of us then, you know, our mounds were like pyramids, and the mounds and the pyramids and the mountains are all kind of the how you get to the top place. Again, it's kind of like isn't that biblical story Tower of Babel? And you saw the message there was kind of like, you know, maybe that's not the best way to go about things. And yet look at this. In Tower of Babel, they all had this kind of one language. Well, today they're ones and zeros. And it's computer code. And you can rebundle that into many different computer languages. And now with artificial intelligence, we'll see just how intelligent we are not. And this is pretty, I mean, we really need to work together. So thank you for being good family and allies. And that's a long answer, but we need to clarify our values. What's worth living for? And then can we commit to coming together as a, you know, 3 to 10 families in, say, 10 to 20 acres, and we're in it for the long haul. When things get tough and we have personality issues, because, you know, you can't build a utopia because there's no perfect people. So that's what our theology and our philosophies, and hopefully, you know, 10 millennia of how not to do it. And we're still trying to figure this out. I better be quiet so I can take a few more questions and then maybe show you a couple more images.
Great,
like
thank
Cass.
you, Jim. Yep, Cass is next with a question.
Hi, Jim. Thank you so much for talking to us. It has been extremely just great to hear everything you shared, and I'm very grateful for it. Yeah, my question, I'm curious if you see, I guess, like sources of wisdom in the Western tradition, in because you're trained, right, both in this like Western tradition and also in, you know, the heritage of like indigenous wisdom, but among groups like the alchemists who, you know, gave birth to chemistry and had wisdom like that maxim, as above so below, like that's like there were Western people saying that they were the alchemists. And so but they're not thought about. So I'm curious, but they're not talked about that much today, you know, among serious scientists. I'm curious if you see wisdom there, if you see other sources of like wisdom in the Western tradition that can be drawn upon as resources for our moment.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And short answer is most definitely yes. For my own personal walk too. My dad, one of the earliest memories, you know, is being out in the woods or the bush or however you say it, the forest, you know, and there's these little plants, right? And he'd be like, you know, gently rub your fingers on that one, or, you know, say please, and maybe leave some tobacco and pluck that leaf and maybe taste it, put it under your tongue. And there was some minty ones. And, you know, and then he would start talking about some of that. Now, my Dakota dad's grandmother, she lived to be 8 days short of 100. Her name was, well, she was Owakpewian. That wasn't her name, but that was her profession, her role. That means a leaf woman, herbalist. So she certainly knew that, and during the winter, when the snow's on the ground, we can tell some of these stories about how the plants and the stars are connected. They have shapes. So it's very much what the alchemists and ethnobotanists in the old world too called doctrine of signatures. The shapes and the patterns, the numbers, what in the old world are called Fibonacci numbers, but we didn't have that Italian guy over here, but we knew those numbers. We saw those are the ratios of life, the Huichoni numbers, the Bimadasuin numbers. And so really the Maya temples were built by, you know, making that golden rectangle, because we saw it in seashells and sunflower seeds, pine cones, our own bodies, you know, the ratio, our canoe paddles. Then when you make a canoe out of a tree, it's all those natural ergonomics, the physics and energy mass balance. So I personally have been fascinated, and yes, that as above, so below is our Capemini concept. That philosophy 400 years ago separated, right, with people like Galileo and after Galileo to Newton. But Newton was a closet alchemist too. And here he's discovering, these calculus and laws of physics and so forth. But he didn't tell people he was still working with mercury. And unfortunately, the symptoms caught up to him and, for a while there. But yeah, they're very powerful. And I can say that my Western STEM training did not prepare me for the things that I'm so grateful that I've been able to experience. Many of those people with those amazing gifts have gone back. There are still some people who have those abilities that none of the Western training, none of the equations, nuclear equations, chemicals, astrophysics knows about. And we have to be very responsible. You probably saw the Oppenheimer movie. You know what I'm talking about. In fact, many of those people in the Oppenheimer movie were some of my professors at the University of Minnesota. There's an ethics. We can be scientists. I would say I can teach you to be a physicist. I can teach you to be a chemist. I can't teach you to be a good one. That's where you're going to need your value system, your axiology. So there's 3 parts to philosophy. There's the epistemology, the metaphysics, and the axiology. That's your knowledge, your reality, and your values. KRV, knowledge, reality, values. Those all lean together like 3 teepee poles too, So I guess I'm fascinated. Yeah, I could go on and on about that.
Thank you, Jim. I want to take maybe one more question, and then I'd like to give you a chance to share the last pieces you wanted us to see.
Thank you.
It looks like Heath has a question or comment.
Oh, great.
Go ahead, Heath.
Jim, thank you so much for sharing this time with us. It really has been a gift to hear from you. One of the things I loved about your presentation was all the photos and stories that you shared where I saw or heard about people of different generations interacting with one another. And I was wondering if you could just say a little bit more about the transmission of wisdom from the elders to people of younger generations.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know our Western education is very much, all the 4-year-olds get together and then all the 5 and the 6, and it's, we're intergenerational, we're interdisciplinary. So music comes with our math, dance comes with, architecture or, it's STEM and clay, science, tech, engineering, and math, with culture, language, arts, humanities. Of course, the original STEM was space and time and matter and energy. All cultures dealing with that, right? So I think if we're all science, we don't have that balance of the humanities and the arts. Similarly, numbers and letters and that kind of natural literacy and natural numeracy, that's what I wrote about in a master's thesis, 26 years or so ago, was that nature has numbers to show us. A turtle shell has that number 13 and so forth. So I guess what I would say is we're interdisciplinary, intergenerational, we're holistic. A part represents the whole, and the whole has many parts. Holism. We're spiritual. That's a term that's not easily defined, but we admit that like breath is in and out of our lungs, and yet breath is molecular. It's gas and liquids, right? But there's a part of us that is energy, it lasts much longer than the temporary. When you realize there are deep, long consequences, you live in a different way. And so we are really trying not to live for our one fix at a time. That's challenging. So we follow, 12 steps or our traditional ways of maintaining sobriety and accountability, truth telling, holding each other to that, working hard together, sunrise to sunset. We're not the only project. There are maybe at least 30 that we all know. We teach each other all across Turtle Island. There's the Winnemucca out in California, or the Passamaquoddies. There's the Muskogee Creek. Many of us are trying to go back to those places where Andrew Jackson Trail of Tears pushed us out from, or they pushed us all into Oklahoma. And you saw, unfortunately, the Flower Moon movie. It's very true. And yet we've been having Zoom with many of those folks. I was just able to have 6 days in Chiapas in a Maya community where they're hanging on to their traditional ways too. And the Mexican government's willing to pay that indigenous community to keep the poachers and the narco traffickers and the how do I want to say, the extractionists out of that, one of those last green places that hasn't been monocropped. They still have jaguars and boa constrictors, crocodiles and monkeys and those tropical birds. But then those birds fly up here and they don't have habitat. The butterflies are 60% less now in that part of Mexico. And it's heartbreaking. We need to work together, not just as selfish humans, but to really literally fight with love, a kind of fight that's ferocious and fierce, like a mama bear, that's going to protect what's left, because we can't live without, nature will be fine without us, I guess. It won't be the same, but if we take her down with us, but we need her. So that's those values. Yeah. Thank you.
So Jim, I recognize that we're at the end of our time, and a question I have is, would you like to share a little bit more with us? I would love to provide the space for you if you're willing. Thank you.
Better closure if I show you just a couple more pictures here, maybe 10 minutes. What do you think? 15? Is that all right?
Great. Yeah, okay. Terrific.
All right. I'll share screen again. And this time we'll bounce over to, here we go. So you know that the Earth spins for night and day. You know that the Earth circles around the sun for a year. And because we're tilted while we're spinning, circling, and tilted, but we tilt at the same 23 degrees, that gives us 4 seasons. And those 4 seasons then produce a time of the most night and the least day, the most day and the least night, and then very briefly, equal day and night twice. So those are the 2 equinoxes, the 2 solstices. Those are the 4 holy days or holidays that almost every faith tradition around the world people can agree on. There's not much we humans agree on, but those 4 points, but even there, if you're at the North Pole or the South Pole, it's, there's a time where the sun doesn't come up or it doesn't go down. So trying to find these points of agreement, I've found that the sun and the moon is one way to do that. But here's another thing. You'll notice this animation. There's about a 3-second tracing of a yellow circle here. Polaris, the North Star, is not always the North Star. It's almost 26,000 years that the Earth is wobbled by the sun and the moon pulling on the Earth. Therefore, the North Star changes. And there are different stars that kind of come into a place, but most of the time there isn't even a star. There is now. And so do you think my people and some of our relatives here, as this series will point out with, I believe, 6 speakers from North and South, Central America, and also Australia. Yes, we did know this. Well, how accurately could we know it? How about this? 99.8% perfection. 99.8% bullseye to that number? Yes. And that's the stuff that I'm just publishing with other anthropologists, archaeologists, astronomers. You can read that yellow piece there. I don't have time to show how I come up with this over the last number of years. How did we do it? Well, one easy beginning answer is we didn't just count by 12 and 60. The Egyptians and the Babylonians, the Greeks and Romans, they loved 12 and 60. We love 13 and 20 or 28. If you count by 13s and 20s and 28s, you're going to understand eclipses. And when you think about, well, what causes that? Well, the sun and the moon and the earth are really pulling on each other. They're all connected. We call that gravity in the Western tradition, but in our tradition, what if you call it love? It's a gravitational love connectedness, huh? So we find our star path, and you'll find that whether it's a hurricane or a galaxy, it's a spiral. And the spiral has numbers in it. And so that concept of forever, oihanke, shni, no ending. So you'll see a clockwise and a counterclockwise. And you'll notice that on the same pine cone, there may be 8 going counterclockwise while there are 13 going clockwise. And so it seems paradoxical, but we have ways of encoding that in our beadwork and so forth, quill work, our dances, architecture, and this is the star architecture. If you take the number 13 and you divide by 8, 13 over 8 gives you a number. Now, I'm not saying this is how we did it, but it's possible. It's not that hard, but it is a in this case, it's 1.625. It's a non-whole number. It's not 1.5. That'd be 16 over 8 if it was 2, but it's more than 1.5 and it's less than 2. It's 1.625. There it is, see? And what we're looking at is that number, which really continues too. How close to that perfect number can we get? Well, that's the number nature is based on, and your body is based on it. And Leonardo da Vinci's friend, Luca Pacioli, and way before them in the Renaissance, they knew about it, but so have we. You know, when you look at our bone segments and the ratios of those, we certainly knew how to look at bones and how our bodies and muscles work together. And if you measure, we had our own measurement systems. And in our Dakota system, it's called Wichishpa. The Wichishpa is a cubit from the inside elbow up to the tip of the middle finger, a Wichishpa. Now, that's, again, some of my recovery work. So that Ikikchupi, it's not just Makoche Ikikchupi, but Wayawa Ikikchupi, number recovery, pattern recognition, measurement system recovery. And so when you do that, you'll recognize ratios, and it's just built into us. And why should we be surprised that, it's how you build a galaxy or a body? And we believe there's a star up by the Milky Way that matches a cave down here by the river. That's the little video I showed you. And so if you take that literally, you can do measurements, you can do alignments, and you'll see these patterns. And it's the pattern for balance, health. It goes back in the old world to, sort of earth, air, fire, water, or the four humors, blood, bile, so forth. We didn't quite do it that way, but the serpent on a pole is a good symbol. It's not one to be all about fear. And that's what happened. The rattlesnakes here were hunted almost to extinction. We had to have a law in the 1970s to help them to have a chance to come back. Because if you respect the power of that serpent, there are number patterns to be noticed there. I don't have time now today to go into it, but there's the cave. And I told you, if you go 14 miles at a certain angle and you know about the buffalo in the sky, that's the kind of star stuff we are. We're buffalo star stuff. We say that the buffalo's 3 backbones, well, that's Orion's belt to the western. Those are the 3 hump bones. So that's part of my dad's name. So if I wanted to understand his, don't stand in front of the black buffalo, look where the buffalo ranged, 60 million. And here's some of my relatives from the Maya and the Inca worlds, south. We've worked together over the years. We share knowledge with each other. We help recognize whether we're llama people or buffalo people or corn people, bison and llamas and corn. Oh my, it's not just lions and tigers and bears. So they have a mama llama in the Milky Way. whereas we have, you know, a mama buffalo. And so there are some amazing ancient connections. So we've had these opportunities over the years. We come down there, they come up here. We teach each other. So that's the archaeoastronomy and the ethnoastronomy that I do. This is a drawing on the top of one of the pyramids in the Maya world at what's called Lakamha or Palenque. And it's a seashell. Do you see the seashell in there? And there's this little dude sort of either pulling, that's a corn stalk. Again, we don't have time to go into it, but these are words. This is a written language. And it's a written language that saw in those seashells, like pine cones, this number pattern to where the corn comes out and how many kernels there are. And that's similar to our body. So the Maya did not think of it as an ear of corn, but a head of corn. And so that corn is planted. It's like death. It's buried in the ground, right? It's like a ceremony, almost like a funeral, but with hope, with joy, with life, with offering, that with water and that Mother Earth skin, that corn is going to come back and multiply because humans modified the corn. And that's that relationship, the reciprocal, you know, don't take more than you need. And so that's a corn stalk coming out of this amazing, not just a turtle shell, but a seashell. And the turtle shell is Earth Mother. And they carved these stories on these turtle shells. And they even saw it like a face. And you could blow like a, you know, the shofar in the Hebrew tradition is like a, you know, for the equinox to announce, you know, the sun is in its place and so forth. The ritual has begun, you know. So it makes that beautiful trumpet sound. And pyramids like this, where there's 9 levels, and there's a snake in that staircase, the snake head's at the bottom. It turns out there's a snake star tail. Well, that's my people's buffalo head. The Maya snake tail is our buffalo head. And there's also a turtle stars. There's 3 triangular turtle stars for the Maya. Well, that's our 3 teepee poles, which are like the 3 buffalo backbone stars in Orion. The Mayan Orion is a turtle, but ours is a buffalo. I'm going too quickly on this, but what I'm trying to tell you is a snake and a turtle, when you put them together, they showed me how to predict eclipses. And I didn't learn it from the Maya, but from understanding the number pattern here. Again, I don't have time to go into that, but I've published articles on it. So if you're interested, I'll send them on to Sarah. And there are these patterns, you see, on Turtle Island from north to south. And I'm saying we knew these eclipse paths. We knew that the sun and the moon and the earth would line up every 18 to 19 years or a number in between, 18.61 years. We didn't need decimals either. Maybe we did use them, I don't know. But if it's 6,585 days, that's 18.03 years. It might be 6,940 days. So that's the 19-year pattern. Or it might be in between the 6,795 days or 6,797 days. What I calculated was the 95 days, which means we had a 2-day advance warning that an eclipse might cause a path right through here. And so that's when the rattlesnake tail goes as a warning, you know, pay attention, something could happen here. And so here's some of my other Maya friends, Maya women, astronomers too. And she studies the Maya sky canoe. That's their Milky Way. But you make a canoe out of a tree. And so that's part of why I go to the Maya world and we find out we have words in common. And a lot of this hasn't been really published yet, and it's for us to do, as Sarah was saying. This is by us for us, and it's our privileged cosmology. It's the last part of us that still makes it us. So when I show you this canoe and we're all in there, I'm really saying that literally. For thousands of years, we are recovering these broken pieces of the Humpty Dumpty eggshell. And we don't just want to thrive, but survive. And maybe that's some of the answers we need to get through this terrible time of change on this planet. And so they carved bones with these pictures. This is actually the Milky Way sky canoe, and those are star animals, and that's the sun and the moon, who are the paddlers. And those are 3 buffalo backbone. And that's our 3 teepee poles, because really the teepee is the buffalo. And when you think about it, where's the first teepee that we ever live in? That's our mom. And so to tie the teepee poles together, there's a rope. And that rope is our umbilical cord. And you'll find out that that teepee rope umbilical cord is also the snake. And I could push it a little, probably too far, but say, I can see some evidence in the old world that that's really what was going on. And this fear of snakes and fear of women and this feminine, matriarchal, beautiful, it's where daddy got too, maybe fearful that women have this natural ability to be co-creators, and that fear of blood and that holy bond. And so we've been taught these ways to respect our women, to protect them. And so now maybe you can see that the starchitecture here, when those 3 teepee poles are together, and then when you spread them out, it makes a triangle. And then you add 4 and 4 and 4 more, or 3 and 3 and 3 more. So then you get 3, 3, 3 plus the original 3, that's 12. And then the rope down the middle is 13. And that's the 13 months in the year. So these were the star animals on the cave ceiling. And so I know time is short here, but you can actually measure the 26,000 year wobble because there's a star constellation. If it's not wintertime, I shouldn't share it. So this video, I don't know how long we'll have it, but I'm going to stop about here so you realize that when the mama gives birth to the baby in the teepee, this is a great place to kind of end the circle, but it's really not an ending. It's a new beginning. Our our earth lodge that we built out at Zani Otunwe with the Makoche Ikikchupi Project. The first Dakota woman to give birth in over 300, maybe 400 years in an earth lodge. That little baby is going to be 2 years old this July or August, I believe. And he's a boy, and he's already at about less than a year. He can take a drumstick and keep perfect time on Grandpa's drum. And he's been hearing his language. We didn't use English around him. It was all women when he came into that birth in the Earth Lodge, in the 13 tree lodge around him, the 13 moons, like the 13 parts of the turtle shell, and those songs and prayers and learning to live in a good way. So we have a Dakota snake stars. It's 16 stars in that snake. And that's part of what helped me realize what that mound was 14 miles away. And here's how you would write illiterate in Hebrew and Arabic. But I'm not so sure we were illiterate. We didn't have an alphabet, so let's take off the on, yeah? And there's how you say alphabetos. In Greek, from left to right, but in Hebrew, from right to left, huh? So can you read a rattlesnake? Can you read a turtle? Can you read a buffalo? And so, learning to read each other's languages, whether we're Maya or Dakota. And so, going to some of these places over the last 30 years, I've been learning from my relatives and their architecture and our starchitecture, and realizing we were probably hanging out with each other during the ice ages. So I guess I'll pretty stop there. And that's not quite what I had planned on sharing, but I hope that gives you a teaser and an introduction to your other 5 speakers. Thank you so much, Michante Etan, Nina Wopi Tatanka, for this, your willingness to listen.
Thank you, Jim. We appreciate your time and your generosity of time and heart and sharing with us so authentically and genuinely this cosmology, a way of understanding the world and reality. I often will say cosmology is the merger of spirituality and science, the two together. And so thank you for being willing to share this cosmology with us. It was strange to send tobacco by the mail, but I thank you for receiving our tobacco. We honor you. Thank you.
Yeah. The U.S. Post Service did its job, and I got it before today even. So yeah, this is to recognize all those grandmas, all those medicine women, healers that taught us how to live in a good way. And tobacco comes first in our way. We have tobacco stars. And that's when the sun goes through there, it's about April 20th. So the sun's like fire. So it means we're going to light some of that, in a couple of months. Many meanings, but thank you so much.
You bet. And for our learners, I'll just say that we honor the ways of our people across time and space. While we have, it's been the ambition to eradicate us from the face of the earth, still we survive and seek to thrive. And so I honor you with one of the 4 sacred plants, tobacco, one of the 4 sacred plants of my people, and also yours here in on Turtle Island. All right, everyone, so good to see you, and thank you for your time and for your willingness, and thanks to Jim, and we'll see you all again soon. And Jim, I look forward to being in touch with you. I'm serious about being a student. If you have the capacity, I'd love to learn more.
And I'm a student too. We say unspe unkichichiapi. Unspe unkichichiapi. It means we teach and learn together. We're all students. We're all teachers. That's the teepee pole way.